Before you today is a man, Tom Curran, who has taken on and faced what is sad, poignant, and horrendously difficult task. I believe he is acting in what is not only a courageous way, but also in a civilized and compassionate way. He is in the middle of a Supreme Court case, appeal, and he is appealing the High Court decision not to allow him assist his partner in suicide. I invite you to warmly welcome Tom Curran.
Thank you. I suppose having started this journey maybe 12 years ago, I had no idea that I'd be standing up here or standing in the Supreme Court or standing in the High Court or standing in the Late Late Show or anywhere else like that. Because my reason for getting involved was twofold. First, I suppose philosophical, in that I've always been a campaigner for people's rights. And when I became a full-time carer for Marie 12 years ago, one of the first things I did was to get involved with the Carers Association to campaign for the rights of carers, and have become one of the main spokespersons in the country and in Europe for carers' rights. I got involved in the Right to Die movement, as it's sort of generally known around the world, because Marie, when her MS got to the point where she realised that it was going to take over her life, she asked that she be helped to die if it got to the point where she didn't want to tolerate it anymore. It was something that came up in other conversations when I gave up work, because for want of other things, financial problems were going to be enormous, because both of us had reasonably good jobs. We were now depending on state. We live on this disability allowance and carers allowance, so things like that had to be taken into account, and we had to speak about modifying the house because of Marie's condition, and this was one of the things that we had to speak about then. It was something that was put out into the, I suppose, into the arena of conversation, but it was not something that we needed to do anything about immediately. But the conversation continued, and as Marie's MS got worse and her mobility disappeared completely, or well, before it even disappeared completely, we did start to take the thing seriously. And she asked me if I'd research or find out how it might happen. At first, naively, I thought it was something that would be available, that doctors could help or that sort of thing, but I was very stupid in thinking that. We had no idea, nor did we have any intention of breaking the law. It was something that we didn't, again, know anything about. But in researching and in finding that it was illegal to help someone, or even debatable whether it's illegal for Marie to take her own life at the time, I found that the only legal option available to Marie was Dignitas. Dignitas is a clinic in Switzerland, which I'm sure you are all aware of, that is the only place in the world that helps people who don't live in the particular country itself to die. 5 years ago, Marie booked to go to Dignitas because she realised that if she didn't go then, that the option would slowly disappear. For two reasons. One, she wouldn't be able to travel because her mobility was disappearing completely. But more importantly, that the methodology used in Switzerland and in Dignitas is swallow, and Marie's swallow was being affected. So if we didn't move at that time, it would be impossible. Marie didn't want to die then, and thankfully she didn't. But she didn't on the basis that I gave her the assurance that I would help her here. At that stage, we realised that it was against the law. But also, I didn't know anything about how, which is one of the important things which I'll come to later, about the concept of assistance. Marie didn't go, and thankfully she's still alive. Her condition has worsened, but it hasn't worsened to the point yet that she wants to die. She's very tolerant of her situation. I'm not sure that I could be. She's in constant pain. The only part of her body that she can move is her head, and that's very limited. She's got a very active mind, and that has been proven because in taking this case to the High Court, we had to go through all sorts of psychological analysis to prove that she was sane. Well, first of all, that she was sane in the first place. Secondly, that the MS hadn't affected her neurologically to the point where she wasn't thinking rationally. And secondly, and also that she wasn't depressed, so that her wish to die wasn't being driven by depression. She passed all of those with flying colours. Having decided that she wanted, or having given her the option of dying at home, which I think is one of the things that everybody wants to do, to die peacefully in their own bed or in their own home with the people they love around them. It then came down to me to find out how. Because this is where assistance is so important. That while every able-bodied person is entitled to take their own life legally, and this is one of the challenges that we're having now in the court, is whether that legal entitlement gives a right to a person. And that's the debatable part of the court case, which I'll come to in later. But to provide a peaceful and painless death is not something that's that easy. I assumed that there would be methodology available, but there's not. Legally, it's not possible to get drugs, to get methods of taking one's own life. And this is where, as I say, the assistance comes in. This is where I had to go out and find people who were prepared to tell me how, tell me where to get the drugs, and tell me how I could help Marie to die. And that in itself is breaking the law. Even for me to do that for Marie is breaking the law. Because the law says it's aiding and abetting. And the law has, not quite in Ireland yet, but in other parts of the world, been changed, that not only is it to aid and abet a suicide or an attempted suicide, but it's to aid and abet whether a suicide is committed at all or not, or whether there's an attempt. And the law has been changed in the UK to reflect that, which means that people who give information to other people, irrespective of whether those people have ever any intention of using that information or not, are breaking the law and are liable for 14 years in jail. And the law is the same here. It will be changed here. It's getting worse instead of better. The reason, as I say, there are two very basic reasons why assistance is one of the primary rights, I think, of any person, providing you accept that the person have a right to their own autonomy and to be able to take their own life themselves. The first is in providing a peaceful and painless death. Suicide is a right, a legal right to everybody in Ireland since 1993. But a painful death is usually what people suffer when they take their own lives. And I'd like to draw a very clear distinction between the emotive suicides that we hear about all the time and the type of suicide that I'm talking about here and that other people in my situation are talking about. The suicides that take place that are based on financial difficulties or emotional problems with relationships and things like that are spontaneous suicides. We are talking about a situation where people plan well in advance to avoid a painful death. And that's exactly what we have done. We have our method put in place, but it is still illegal for me to help Marie. Marie's condition has deteriorated to the point that she is just about able to help herself with the use of mechanical means. From the methodology point of view, there are two methods that are used worldwide for people to take their own life peacefully. One is a chemical method, which involves, in most cases, the drinking of a liquid. There has been research all over the world to try to develop the peaceful pill, but to date it hasn't been developed. There are all sorts of methods that are using pills such as cyanide, but they're not peaceful and they're not painless. The only painless method that is available at the moment is to drink a liquid. That liquid is not available except to buy illegally. The second method is to use gas. And the gas can be used in two different ways. One is a poisonous gas, such as carbon monoxide, which again is very, very peaceful and very painless and very instant, but is not readily available. The other is to use a gas, an inert gas, to prevent the oxygen being taken into the system, and to provide an oxygen-free environment by the use of an inert gas such as nitrogen or helium, which are the two most common gases. For me telling you about this, if I was in England, I would be breaking the law. Here, luckily, I'm not. But we still give the information in England. In researching the information, I came across an organisation called Exit International, which were one of the few people who were prepared to give me this detail. And because of that, and because of my, I suppose, activist role over the years, I am now representing Exit in Europe. The right to die movement around the world, I suppose, falls into two categories. One, I suppose, is the public face of the right to die, which are places like organisations in the UK like Dignity in Dying, and here like Dignity in Dying. And their role is to campaign for the law to be changed. They tend to be relatively conservative, and it's a slow process. I suppose I'm falling into that category here by challenging the constitutionality of the Suicide Act. But at the same time, I know that we will probably fail. I know that it may go to Europe, it may not go to Europe, but we'll probably fail there as well. But in the meantime, we have our plan in place. The second group of people to which Exit is one, and there are organisations like it all over the world, are people who feel that there are people like Marie who need help now. That they're not going to wait for the law to be changed, and that they are prepared to go out on a limb and to come very close to, if not to break the law, to provide that information and to provide assistance to people. As I say, Exit is one of them. There are organisations, there's the Foundation for Living and Dying, which is part of Canada. There are organisations all over the world. They tend to be relatively quiet, they tend to be hidden. The reason being that they do skirt very close to breaking the law. And it's also very difficult to find people who are prepared to talk about the issue, because it's one of these things that, I suppose because of, again, the emotive problems with suicide, it draws attention to people. And as I found out since we became public, that one of the first things that people assume when you say that you want to take your own life or that you're thinking of taking your own life is that you're depressed, that it becomes a mental issue. In fact, most of the situations where I'm asked to speak, it's people like psychologists and psychiatrists that are asked to speak against me, because it's assumed that it's a mental issue. But as with Marie, it's not. Marie is perfectly sane, she's perfectly rational, and I think she's perfectly reasonable in what she wants to do. And I think I'm perfectly reasonable in wanting to help her. Organisations like Exit, as I say, tend to be relatively quiet because of the difficulties that they draw, or the difficulties that they bring upon themselves, and the limit of the help that they can give if they're too much in the public. Exit is the one that I'm involved in, and Exit has a series of functions. Its most popular function, I suppose, is the publication of both a booklet, which is this, the Peaceful Pill Handbook, which goes into all the methods and methodologies, where to source, how to put together the means of taking your own life peacefully. The only country that it's banned in is Australia, where it originated. And they also produce exactly the same thing on a website. The website tends to be more informative because it's updated regularly. Because of our limited resources, we can't reprint hard copy books very regularly. So the website is a far more, I suppose, up-to-date version of our publication. The second thing that we do is we go around the world with workshops. In fact, one of the workshops was supposed to be here about 2 years ago until Buswell's cancelled on us. I believe that it's the only cancellation that Buswell's have ever issued to a group like ourselves, or any group. And we eventually found a venue here. We're planning another workshop here in June, and we still have to find a venue. but we'll deal with that when the time comes. The other thing that we have is local branches. In Ireland, we have about 200 members in Ireland. Most of them keep very quiet about it because, again, they don't want to draw attention to themselves. And the last thing then is research. And research is one of our most important functions. There is a general research group, but largely based in America and Canada, but our one is European and Australian. And the research is, I suppose, a bit morbid in that we research methods and the access to things that will help people to die, but to die peacefully. And one of the criteria in the things that we try to research is that they are readily available, and that's the difficult bit. We are about to launch on the market the availability of nitrogen to use as a gas for a peaceful death. The reason being that helium has been used up to now because it's readily available in balloon shops, in most cases, for inflating balloons, but helium has become so popular that autopsies are detecting it. Helium, because it's contained in the atmosphere and in air, it's absolutely undetectable. Or sorry, nitrogen, I should say. Yeah. It's absolutely undetectable. So we're launching, and part of the visit to Ireland will be to launch in Europe the availability of nitrogen. I suppose that's enough about exit and the movement itself. The court case, I suppose, came about by accident, largely, as my involvement in the whole organisation or the whole Right to Die movement around the world. When Marie didn't go to Zurich, to Dignitas, having researched the methodology, it became accidentally public that I was prepared to help Marie to die. Two things happened. First of all, the HSE tried to make Marie a ward of court to get her taken away because they felt that she was in danger from me, because I had said that I would help her. And the second thing is that I was the subject of a police investigation. And that brought to my attention the fact that this was absolutely unfair, that I was helping Marie avoid a painful death with something that she wanted to do, not that I was going to kill her against her wishes, but that was something that she wanted to do, and I felt that that was absolutely wrong. I investigated the law, the Constitution, and I felt that it was discrimination against the disabled. This was about 3 years ago. I tried to take the case then and failed miserably. Nobody wanted to talk to me about it. The Commission for Civil Liberties, FLAC, everybody else that I spoke to just told me to go away, that it would never happen here in Ireland. I was speaking at the World Right to Die Federation meeting, which happens every 2 years, in Zurich, as it happened to be, last year. And while we were there, news came through that a challenge in Canada had been successful. And that changed things dramatically, because it was now respectable and people were prepared to listen. Canada being a very, I suppose, reasonable country, and a country with a constitution and a law very similar to ours, a case had been taken there by a series of people, not on the same basis that our case has been taken here, but by a series of people, and the High Court in Canada had upheld it. It's being appealed at the moment, and in fact the appeal starts tomorrow. And it will then probably go on to the Superior Court in Canada as well. But when I came back from Zurich, I started the process again, and I found that there was a team that was prepared to take on the state. We put that team together and we made our submission to the High Court. The challenge was being taken on two bases. First, that a person had a right to autonomy, and had a right to take their own life. And that's the one that's difficult to prove. And that if that was the case, then Marie's rights were being taken away from her because of her disability by not being able to get help. And the second was on discrimination. That because of her disability, legally she had a right to take her own life, but that the law was preventing her from doing that on the basis of her disability. She was unable to do it herself, physically unable to do it herself. And it specifically says in the Constitution that nobody will be discriminated against by law because of a disability or because of various other things. So the challenge has been taken on two fronts. That her disability is preventing her from exercising her right in the law. And secondly, that we feel that there is a right to take her own life and that she's been discriminated against that by not being able to get assistance as well. The High Court turned down the submission on the basis that they said that Marie's case was that her rights were being discriminated against, but that it was disproportionate. And that if they did change the law, that it would put vulnerable people at risk. We contend that the limited availability that we're talking about would not put anybody at risk. And that's where the case rests at the moment. The final day of submission in the Supreme Court is next Tuesday, and we just have to wait then. It's very likely that they will rush a judgment through the same as they did in the High Court, and the fact that it went to the Supreme Court very quickly. We don't know what way it goes. My feeling is that we'll fail, because Ireland still isn't ready. The whole basis of making law in Ireland, to me, is, well, it's not that strange, but there are three factors that come into, I suppose, existence when we get our permission to do things within the law. The first is the law itself, the law of the land, which everybody in the country is obliged to, I suppose, to abide by, unless they're prepared to face the consequences. Those laws tend to be brought in based on morality, the morality that exists at the time. And in some cases, that morality, or the laws that are brought in under that, can offend some people. I mean, there are a lot of people, I think, that would be offended by the fact that homosexuality was made legal. Sometimes the laws, I suppose, go to the point where they impinge on people's rights because of public morality. A case being urination. We're all free to urinate. We can urinate at home. But there is a law against urinating in public. So the law is there to protect the morality of society. But the biggest problem that I see is that religion comes into it, and the morality of religion. And they can be very closely linked. And in Ireland, up to now, the religious morality has dominated public morality. And that's something that to me needs to change. We're doing our best to make one change in it, but I doubt if we'll be successful. I am still prepared to help Marie, irrespective of the consequences. Marie isn't ready to die yet, but when she is, I am quite prepared to help her. Thank you for listening to me.